This is my rules explanation for the capitals. Anatomy of a tile, take 3. Each tile is made up of the same basic parts. The tile is the most common tool in the game. Each player will be building a tableau of tiles in front of them. Tiles will have varied effects on the left side. At the bottom is the tile's name. To the right on the bottom are the immediate effects for when the tile is built. To the right top is the building type, which will show you what tiles it can be built next to, as well as representing the common things associated with that tile. And finally at the top, the era, which shows you when the tile comes into play. Each tile has a different type, and you can see here each of the different types. Green for housing, yellow for industry, blue for commerce, red for tourism, brown for public, black for power, and purple for prosperity. The varied effects on the left side of the tile will show icons that you see below. The exclamation point represents tiles that come into play immediately and go off when the tile comes into play. The lightning bolt represents an effect that will occur when the tile is activated using energy cubes. The wrench is a construction effect which is triggered when something is built on the board. Usually this will be adjacent to the tile, but sometimes can be anywhere on the board. The infinity symbol represents an ongoing effect, and the checkered flag represents something that is triggered at the end of the game. We can notice the arrows around the edges of a tile. This means that its effect will be triggered based only on the things adjacent to it. This includes diagonal as well as orthogonal. The game board is made up of a variety of tracks representing qualities of your city. Each of these tracks is associated primarily with one building type. The culture track represents just that, the culture level of your city. This attracts tourists and can also gain you extra activations by having the highest culture token. The main source of culture is tourism tiles. Employment track represents how many of the people in your city are employed. This is, as it says, the main source of prestige points, which are the victory points of the game. The main source of this is industry tiles. Population, well, that's just what it says also. How many people you got living in your city. You can't have more people employed than you have living in your city. At the end of each era, you will lose victory points based on your unemployment, which is the difference between your population and employment. Population is provided by housing tiles. Public services are the things that a city is just expected to provide for its people. It is provided through the public service tiles. Economy is what brings in money to the game. All money is tracked in the game using the economy track. It also can help in a case of a tie to determine who wins the tie. in any question in the game. It's provided by the blue commerce tiles. And finally, the progress track is what provides you power plants as you're going along. And getting power plants is what gets you new power plants. The progress track is the only one which is circular, and each time you go make a lap around the track, you will gain a new power plant. So that would be whenever you pass the lightning bolt arrow up symbol there at the bottom. When you take a new power plant, you take the top plant from the pile and move the cubes that you have on your current power plant to the new power plant and add a total of cubes equal to the value on the new power plant as well. No cubes are lost in upgrading a power plant. Here's an image of how the power plants might be stacked. If you were the first one to take a power plant, you would take 6 cubes, as you see in the bottom right corner. You would add this to the cubes that you already had. The player after that would get 5 cubes, and the player after that would get 4. Another feature of the power plants is that it determines how many activations you get. As you can see here, this power plant only provides a single activation. The purpose of the game is to have the greatest level of prestige at the end of the game. The way that this is done throughout the game is the collection of prestige points in the form of tokens. There are positive and there are negative. These are kept hidden in front of you face down at all times. Players can know the number of tiles, but not what their values are. The game is made up of 3 eras divided into a total of 12 rounds. So there will be 4 rounds in each era. Each round is divided into 5 phases. The political phase, the building phase, the tourism phase, the executive phase, and the administrative phase. In the political phase, we determine the round initiative order. This phase is skipped in the first round of the game, but thereafter, all the player order markers are slid from the top to the bottom, and then in initiative order from left to right, a player will slide their marker to the top where they want to be in the turn order, and then pay the value of the space that they are in at the top times the space that they came from. So in this case, the blue player would pay $8, moving from a ×4 to a $2 space. This is repeated for each player until each player has moved from a space at the bottom to the top. It should be noted at the end of the first, or actually at the beginning of the second round, the 5th place, or in this case 6th place, that says ×2 will only be ×1, so that the player who ended up in last place in the first round of the game does not get punished. The second phase of the game is the building phase. Each player must build 1 building each round. There are 2 parts to the building phase. First, the player will select a building tile from the projects area on the board. As is shown, the building tiles in the top row cost $0, below that is $2, and below that is $4. Once the player has paid for their tile, they immediately place it into their city. There are 2 rules for placing a building. The building must be placed next to one of the construction markers which are these plus-shaped roads. Second of all, the building must be placed next to a building of the same color. Reminder that diagonal counts as adjacent. Each of these rules can be broken, but for each rule broken, there's a penalty of -2 prestige points. So, again, to repeat, it must be built next to a construction marker and next to and adjacent to a tile of the same color. Each of those rules which is not followed or cannot be followed, it is -2 prestige points. When a construction marker is completely surrounded, as the one in the middle is here, it can be moved to any position adjacent to the player's city. It cannot be moved at any time until then. Once a tile has been placed in the city, we update the game tracks immediately on the game board based on the impact of the effect on the right side of the tile. Most commonly, we will see immediate effects shown by the exclamation point. In this case, it would be moving 3 spaces on the progress track, 2 spaces on the employment track, and losing 2 spaces on the public services track. Some effects might be conditional. In this case, this tile has a conditional effect because it's shown in the black box here and is next to a value in a black number. This one says that when placed, if this city has an employment value of at least 3, they gain 2 culture. Various types of, there's a variety of different effects that might be required. Here, your employment must be 3. I'm wondering if I said employment on the previous one, and that would be population, not employment. This is population. This would be, this is population. This is employment. Population, employment. This one says, whenever you upgrade your power plant, gain 2 culture. This one says, whenever you build high density housing, which is represented by the 3 little houses in red next to the image, gain 3 culture. There is low density in green, medium density in yellow, and high density in red. This one says, whenever you build adjacent to this space, gain 1 population. Most of the tracks on the game board have something which happens if you were to go off the bottom or off the top of the track. In this case, it was saying gain 2 prestige each time that you go off the top of the track. It does not matter how many times you exceed the value of the top of the track. You only get that bonus once for each thing that causes you to move past the end of the track, or the beginning. After completing the building phase, we move into the tourism phase. During this phase, we look at the culture track and determine who is highest on it. That player receives the highest culture token, which will give them an extra activation for the turn. Also during this phase, the player with the lowest culture will move their tourist token marker to the player of the highest culture. Tourist token is the little car of the player's culture. Normally, each player has their own tourist marker. However, as I said, the lowest culture player will give theirs to the highest. As well, there are certain stages that if a player exceeds the spot on the board, players at a certain level or lower will all give all their tourist markers to the highest player. There are 3 spots on the board. Green, which shows as being less than 6 on the board. Yellow and green, which shows as being less than 10 on the board. And less than 24 for yellow, green, and blue. What this means is that if the highest culture player has passed that mark, the number 9 space on the board, any players still at 5 or below will give their tourist marker to the highest culture player, even if that player is not the lowest. So everyone on spaces 0 through 5 will give their tourist markers to a person at 9 or above. And likewise for space 14, people who are 10 or who are less than 10 will give their tourist markers. And finally for space 24, everyone who is less than that player will give their tourist markers to the player who is above it. The executive phase is where each player runs their city using their available activations and power cubes. Going in initiative order, each player will activate as many things as they can in their city, doing all their activations before moving on to the next player in initiative order. Activating things in your city means taking cubes from your power plant and putting them on the building tile. To activate a building, you must place a number of cubes on the building tile greater than the number of cubes already there. For example, if a building had no cubes on it, it would take a single cube to activate it once. It could be activated again by placing 2 cubes, and then 3 cubes, etc. It needs to be noted that some buildings come with a cube pre-printed on it, which means that the first activation of that building will require 2 cubes. Cubes are not cleared from round to round. They only clear at the end of an era, which means that it is going to be increasingly expensive to activate your buildings during each of the 4 rounds. Tourist tokens, these little car tokens, can be used to activate a building. If they have been given to a player, they're off the board. To use it, it simply can be treated as any other power cube. Once a tourist token is on a player's board, however, it can only be used to activate a different tile than the one it is currently on. So here, the black tourist token could not be counted to activate this tile. However, it could be taken off and moved to a different location. That would then decrease the number of cubes required on this tile to activate it. So currently it would take 4, but if the black or red car was moved, it will go back to only requiring 3. Activation is not mandatory. If you skip all of your activations, you may take 1 prestige token or 1 power cube. The final phase of the game of the round is the administrative phase. In the administrative phase, the first thing that happens are the construction tokens are refilled. The buildings in the 4th row come off, and the buildings not in the $4 row, not the 4th row, come off, and the building tiles in the $2 row are moved down. Then the tiles in the $0 row are moved down to the $2 row. And finally, the row is refilled so that there are a number of tiles in the whole area equal to 2 plus the number of players. So, for example, up here, we see that a couple of arrow 1 tiles have been moved down, and this is a 4-player game, so 6 tiles fill up the top row. Here, however, there were already 2 era 2 tiles in play, so only 4 tiles are moved in to the top row. At the end of each era, so at the ends of round 4, 8, and 12, there is a special scoring that happens. First, players are scored on their employment track. The game board shows positive or negative points next to a space on the employment track. The players will take points equal to their current marker's space. Then, players are scored based on their unemployment. This is the difference between one's population and employment. If you have an unemployment of 1, it is -1, 2 is -2, and 3 or greater is -3. Then the cubes of that player are removed from their game board. This is when all cubes leave the game board. Finally, players activate the space that they are on in the public service track. And finally, the players lose 2 points for each player higher than them on the public service track. In this case, well, this is one of the places where ties can occur, and this is determined based on the economy track. If both players are on the same space in the economy track, the player who is furthest left on the initiative track is considered higher. If a player needs to spend money that they do not have, they may take the extra taxation action. At a cost of 1 prestige, the player may take $3. It should be noted that the player must always have at least $1. So if a player needed $14, they could take the action 5 times, leaving them with 1 left. However, if the player needed $15, they would need to take the action 6 times, leaving them at 3. This can be used to buy buildings, to activate buildings that require money, but not to bring their money up high enough for a conditional effect. It can also be used to pay for initiative. Prosperity tiles. At the beginning of the game, each player will be given 5 or 6 prosperity tiles, depending on the number of players in the game. At the end of the round, right before the last round of an arrow, you will see the little purple symbol. This means that during that administrative phase, each player will need to build a prosperity tile or build a lake tile, which is on the back of the prosperity tile. Each prosperity tile has requirements. For example, here, this would require that you have the greatest employment. Here we see one that requires you to have the greatest population. Here, you would have to have the most or be tied for the most industry plus commerce buildings. And here, you would have to have the worst public service value on the track. When building a prosperity tile, you follow all normal construction rules, including the construction marker and building color requirements. These can be ignored for the usual -2 prosperity. If a player needs to build a lake, it can be built anywhere on the board and follows no construction rules. It should be noted that the lake tile has no color. After the final evaluation at the end of Era 3, we move to final scoring. Before the final scoring itself, each player must pay for the space they are in on the initiative track, multiplying the bottom of the row they are in by the top. Then take the effects of a endgame tiles, of each of the endgame tiles, do whatever the checkered flag says. So in this case, you would gain 3 employment. Count up all your prestige tiles values for each 4 remaining cubes on your power plant. Spend them to gain 1 prestige. For each $4 on your economy track, spend them for 1 prestige each. Gain 1 prestige for each 2 spaces on the culture track rounded down. And for each space you move beyond your last power plant upgrade on the prestige track, gain 1 point. Ties are determined based on the most energy cubes left, then the furthest ahead on the economy track, and then to the furthest left on the initiative track. The end.